Hello and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we're reviewing The Batman. Directed by Matt Reeves, The Batman finds Robert Pattinson in the titular role tracking the Riddler, a deranged serial killer targeting Gotham's elite. The film also stars Andy Serkis, Zoë Kravitz, Jeffrey Wright, Paul Dano, and Colin Farrell. So Jeffrey, what did you think about The Batman?
So I'm always Mr. Filmography, right? So I think we have to start by talking about Matt Reeves a little bit and how he approaches filmmaking, because I think it makes its way into this film, or at least informs this film. So he first kind of came on the scene with, or the first time I saw one of his films was Let Me In, which is a remake of Let the Right One In. And I thought that was a very good film. He went on to make the two Planet of the Apes sequels, the most recent ones, which I think are really quite good. Especially the second one, I think, is one of the more morally complex mainstream films that's been made in the past 10 or 15 years. The way that we talk about Christopher Nolan, where critical consensus and mainstream cinema meet, I think is where Matt Reeves is maybe going to be in 10 years. I think he's already there, but he's not really thought of in the same esteem as Christopher Nolan. But I've always really appreciated the way that he takes intelligent and complex moral subject matter and applies them to more mainstream films. And I think that carries over into The Batman. I think The Batman is quite good. You know, walking into this film, we said, do I really need to see another Batman movie? You know, we have the definitive Batman movies. And to be fair, I still think those are the definitive Batman movies. There is something here that we haven't quite seen from the Batman saga, at least on film before.
And going from there, talking about Matt Reeves' filmography as you were, I think it's interesting to talk about this iteration of the Batman itself, because this is pretty much the best way I could describe it is Batman gone emo. We have Robert Pattinson playing Batman with this hair swoop over one eye. The mascara, the eye paint is like dripping from his eyes. He pretty much looks like he was kind of plucked from a My Chemical Romance video.
I find this a little reductive, but I understand your joke.
Yes, but in the main point, it's more of like a grittier kind of take on Batman.
This film elevates mood in a way that Nolan's film didn't. Nolan's films had a mood, but you were really there to be propulsed into a story, to be forced into this like freight train of a story. This film is a lot more about sitting with a moodiness.
With that said, though, about the mood, there is a storyline that follows throughout this film, mainly featuring Paul Dano's Riddler character. Gotham is once again torn into chaos when there's not just one cop, not just two bad cops, but there's like a whole plethora of bad people.
There always seems to be a battle for the soul of Gotham City. Sorry.
So we have that once again, the battle for the soul of Gotham City, and can Gotham be saved? The very question that's asked in nearly every Batman film. The great thing about Paul Dano's character and what they did with the Riddler, in a sense, is that in the beginning of the film, he kind of seemingly is just going after these bad people. Mm-hmm. But then as the film progresses, you are made aware of just how deranged his character is.
Yeah, the film, I think, starts, especially towards the end, to echo some of the more fringe elements of our political climate, and in a way that I actually found fairly disturbing. Maybe that's the most disturbing thing that happens in the movie. We won't spoil exactly how it comes about, but that is certainly there. So let's focus a little bit on Paul Dano. His performance is quite good. It's really, really over the top. I think it is just at the line that if he went an inch further, it would be laughable. But where he keeps it, which is, by the way, still over the top, is quite deranged. Like, you start to feel like he could really do anything. And I think that's where some of the more, this film isn't a horror film, but some of the more kind of scary or unnerving elements of this film really come from his character.
Yeah, and there's this absolutely fantastic scene between Batman and the Riddler. And this is just one of those fantastic scenes that almost in my mind kind of rivaled the Batman-Joker conversation that happened in jail in The Dark Knight.
Yeah, and without going into too much detail, the way that Nolan thinks about Batman in film is epitomized very well in that scene versus the way Matt Reeves is thinking about Batman in this scene. I actually found those two scenes to fit together with a really interesting parody in what these two films are going for.
And I think going from there, let's just talk about Robert Pattinson as Batman in this case. I do think he was one of my more favorable Batman performances that I've seen. I felt like he really took an effort to sink into this role and his iteration of Batman. But there are a bunch of things that just went a little bit deeper in this movie. And that's not just limited to Robert Pattinson playing Batman. That's the villains and how deep their characters go. There's more effort put into them as well, especially with Paul Dano. I would say in terms of the Penguin, I wish there was a little bit more of his character, but it does seem like there might be more in the future.
He's fantastic, actually.
But he was really good. I just kind of wish there was something deeper there, a little bit more of a story behind his character.
It's kind of interesting because I think that this film deals more in archetypes than it does in deep characters. And I actually don't think that's a bad thing, because the way this film is, the way this film is it's really trying to be a film noir from almost like the 50s or 60s, mixed with like the David Fincher movies of the 90s, right? So there's a lot of allusions, deliberate allusions to Seven or the film Zodiac. There's also a lot of allusions to Chinatown, to like Humphrey Bogart movies. I'm really interested in that because typically I would find the archetypal characters to be a flaw, but I see them more as nods to cinema's past. You have this deranged serial killer. You have Batman is almost taking on the like lone private detective who has a sad history. There's the femme fatale type character. So all of these archetypes that we've known in film noir for so long have been utilized so interestingly and reframed in a very interesting way in this film.
Jumping from there, I do want to talk a little bit about the score, because I feel like this is a piece that plays a role in the design of this moody film. And this score was absolutely fantastic. And I think that the way that they utilize the new Batman theme, because it became this ominous like tone every time Batman was arriving. After the first couple of times that this happens, the feelings are starting to well up inside you that something's about to go down, something bad's about to happen.
Yeah.
And it played that really well. In most cases, this had to do with like Batman walking in from the shadows or walking through some smoke. And usually there was so much attention to his footsteps. You had his footsteps on concrete. You had his footsteps on a wood floor in a mansion. You had his footsteps on the rain being squishy, squishy. So you got all the types of steps that you could have. There were some wonderful uses of that score. And one particular is this car chase scene that happens between Batman and Penguin, which we were just over the moon with in the theater. I kind of hit you on the arm a couple of times because this scene was just so fantastically done.
One of the things I like so much about the score is, and this is not a knock on Hans Zimmer, who's great, but Hans Zimmer is Hans Zimmer. He's always Hans Zimmer, right? This film actually has quite a variety of its style. It's sometimes very minimalist and kind of clangy, like these bells or these kind of wooden palette sort type of instruments that give this kind of creepy overtone. There are times that it's really overwhelming. You know, there's a lot of horns. There's times where it's really subtle. I actually think there's times that it approaches being a horror score where it has these kind of screeches. I think that he employed a lot of different elements of different types of film scores into this movie, which I really respect about it. I also respect that they made all of those disparate elements work so well in a film. I need to talk about like 3 other things that you were... the car chase. The car chase is unbelievable. So that is filmmaking, seriously. First off, it's shot very innovatively for a car chase. It's very tight. They do this thing where they seem like they attached cameras to the side of the vehicle. So you're driving around and you're almost seeing the wheel in half your vision, and it's super tight, and then you could see the negative space or what's going on in the other half. But it's all done practically, and it's all shot in a very interesting way. And it is just breathtaking. You know, I get very excited by great technical filmmaking, and that was the most excited I've been in a movie theater in quite some time.
To add to that, there was another scene that took place in a hallway that was completely dark. And this scene was absolutely fantastic because the only light you get are from the firing of the guns. That played so well in that scene. There's a scene mirroring it. I don't know, I can't remember if it's at the same exact time or a different point in time, but with Catwoman and Zoë Kravitz, she's kind of going through the same thing. It is at the same time because the power goes out and she's in the same building. Now it's all coming back to me, the recollection. But she's going through the same thing when she's in a fight with somebody as well. And then you see them as kind of silhouettes to this window. It's just so fantastically done, both those scenes in conjunction with one another.
So I want to back up a little bit and talk about the pacing of this film, which I think is fairly slow. It's always very interesting, but especially compared to Nolan's films that are paced so rigorously, this film really takes its time, and you can see that even in the editing style of the film, that certain scenes are a lot longer than they need to be. To talk about some of the fights that you're talking about, this film, in its leisurely pace, is really not built around the action scenes the way that many Marvel movies, maybe many Hollywood blockbusters are. The action scenes, they are quite good, but there's not many of them. There's maybe 3 or 4, I think, in a 3-hour runtime. But every one of them is interesting. I really like how much effort Matt Reeves put into making his action scenes just a little different than what we see every day. And I don't want to start a giant... I'm not saying that DC is better than Marvel. I'm not saying that at all. But Marvel would never make this movie. The way that the action scenes are filmed are in a way that says, let's do something a little interesting, let's do something a little different with a bit more craftsmanship. And Marvel is a lot more interested, I think, in making you feel comfortable as a viewer, and that certainly has its place, and that's perfectly okay. But there's something here that I just really respect on a technical level.
So this is going to backtrack a little bit, because I know we talked a little bit about Robert Pattinson, we talked about Paul Dano, but I do also want to talk about Zoë Kravitz and as Catwoman here, because I think she just did a wonderful, fantastic job here. For extended characters beyond Batman, and this includes Zoë Kravitz and Paul Dano, is that they just did more with them than you get to see. And I think a lot of the runtime is spent on those characters, which is just so nice to see. There was one thing in particular that I thought just came out of left field.
Yes, I know. I'm about to say that as the same flaw too.
Which we can't really go into because it'd be a spoiler, of course. But this thing is dropped on you in 3/4 of the way into the movie with absolutely nothing alluding to it at all.
It's so sudden that actually some people laughed in our theater.
Yes.
I laughed a little bit too, and I think some of it was the way it was directed. It was directed in almost like a way that you would spoof a bad movie. This is a very good movie. There's not a lot of bad direction here, but that scene in particular, I think, was just mishandled. One of the things I like so much about this movie, and this is probably going to recall like The Last Jedi, but I think this film takes our understanding of what we've always thought of as the Wayne legacy and put it into question. And I think that's really interesting. I'm not going to spoil how this happens, but we see it framed from almost two different points of view in the film. And I like that it goes there, because it almost seems to be questioning this idea of the Batman legacy at all. And especially the toxic response to The Last Jedi, I think questioning the legacy of a very well-established franchise is a really ballsy thing to do. And I think it's a really interesting thing to do.
I totally agree with you on that. I think the moral ambiguity of the Wayne family in this film and it being questioned is an important role. And I think how that plays into Batman's character here is really well done, because you get to see him struggling with his past in a way you don't really get to see Batman films do.
Yeah, and Robert Pattinson is not the charismatic playboy. He's not the like, oh, I got two beautiful ladies on my arm kind of Bruce Wayne. He's more like he's journaling, he's sad.
It's very sad.
He has this like big old bathrobe that's really sad, and he eats breakfast with Alfred, and I really like that too, because in a way that's taking away the mythology of we've always thought about Bruce Wayne, or at least the way we've thought about him in films. When we talked about at the beginning of this, do we really need another Batman? The fact that this film went in questioning all the things that we thought of about Batman, I think was the main reason for it to exist at all. So I think some of the flaws of the film, we talked about before, the influences. I do think that the influence is mostly a benefit, but sometimes it borders on being cliche, and sometimes it borders on being a little too simplistic, especially some of the voiceovers. Some of the voiceovers are good, but like all of his ruminating on how awful Gotham is and the trash city it is and all of that stuff and how he's really sad. It was mostly fine, but I think sometimes it was close to being self-parody. There's a couple other scenes like that in the film. I also think the film's a little too long and the plot's a little too convoluted. They probably could have found a way to condense this to maybe 220.
Yeah, and as you said that, it did bring to mind a couple of scenes that I found to be a little bit, I wouldn't say too cringy, but just like a little off. There's like this one scene where Batman's like hanging from a pole towards the end of the film.
Oh, yes.
And like,
I agree. That kind of took me out of the moment.
There's like a facial moment that just looks a little strange on Robert Pattinson's face. I don't know why they used that clip.
Yeah.
And then there is a motorcycle type shot at the end of the film. Mm-hmm. I found it to be a little cliche.
Yeah.
And the way that the music built with it, even though it actually looked really cool. So I was kind of torn. I was watching it and I was like, this is a little cliche, but it also looked really neat. So I was kind of torn on that one, but I do get what you're saying.
There's another thing too that I think the film is so interested in restraint that it's a little too afraid to excite you sometimes. Outside of the car chase and maybe a couple other scenes, I can't say I felt really emotionally connected to this film. I was always interested. I always wanted to see what was happening. I always found what they were going for thematically really interesting. but I can't say I felt that excited. Maybe that's just the happenstance of the style that they were going for, right? That's just a flaw of what's going to happen. But either way, I think I would have liked to feel a little more engaged.
All right, so you ready to go to grades?
Yeah, I give the Batman a B. I really liked it. Again, you know, I did not think that I need another Batman in my life, and I guess I do. I'm really excited to see where this film is going to go next. Another thing I forgot to mention actually in the review that I liked so much about this is it was so nice to sit through a superhero movie that wasn't trying to constantly pitch me other series and films that are coming down the line. So there are other things coming down the line, and they are introduced here, but they're woven into the story, I think, so naturally that they don't feel like they're teasing you. You know, it feels like you could watch this film, and this feels really satisfying. It doesn't feel like you need to come back for more immediately. That's something I really liked about it.
I completely agree with the way you described that, so I don't really have anything to add on that, but I give this movie a B+. Really enjoyed it. Just like you, I went into this movie like, do we really need another Batman? And I kind of felt Batman fatigue at this point. I think after Justice League and Batman vs. Superman, I definitely felt some Batman fatigue. But this movie reignited a little bit of that passion I had for Batman, so I'm very excited to see where this goes. All right, and that's it for our review of The Batman. The Batman is now currently in theaters only, so no HBO Max for this Warner Brothers flick. If you have seen The Batman, let us know in the comments what you thought about the movie. As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.